All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us, and welcome to the Emerging Industries Open Call webinar. This is a briefing that we hold regularly every time that we run an open call within the portfolio program. Today is about round 4 open call, which we released in June for projects in 2020-21. I might just get you to go to the next slide. Thanks, Beck. All right, so as I just wanted to flag for anyone who's just joined us, can I ask that you please mute your microphones while we give the webinar presentation? We will open it up for questioning later, but yeah, just for the purpose of the webinar presentation, if you could mute and also switch off your cameras, that would be appreciated. I do stress that this webinar is being recorded. If anyone has an issue with that, please, we will record the session, and this will be made available on the AgriFutures website on the open call page probably later today. So just a quick overview. We are going to go through a background of what Emerging Industries is, why we do the open calls, and what are some of the key requirements that we have. We've also got our manager corporate, who is going to give you an overview of clarity and training elements that are required in order to put a submission into AgriFutures. We will go through requirements and any changes since the last open call that we made. Look at what are some of the key documents that you should consider when thinking about putting an application through to us. Importantly, what are some of the things that aren't eligible in this open call process, and what we need to receive from you in order to assess your proposal. We'll then open it up with general questions and answers. If you do have questions that you'd like to foreshadow for us to address, please send them through to programs@agrifutures.com.au, and then we'll address those when we get to the Q&A session. Alternatively, we will open it up for discussion during the Q&A session, and then we'll finalise with key dates. So just to the next slide, thanks, Beck. So I'm just going to give a quick background, and then I'm going to hand over to our Emerging Industries Advisory Panel Chairman, Brian Ruddle. So the two pictures on the right, obviously myself is Tom McHugh, Senior Manager, Emerging Industries, and Brian Ruddle, who's our Chairman of the Emerging Industries Advisory Panel. We have an overarching strategy to identify and support the emergence of agricultural industries that can reach or exceed $10 million GDP per annum within the next 5 years. Now, that's actually by 2022, because we have been running for a few years now. So for us, it's about identifying industries that have that potential, and we do that through research and development projects. This is our 4th open call since the program started, and we have invested in quite a large number of projects in the last 2 rounds in particular, and they cover a number of different emerging industries across animals, aquatics, and plant-based industries. So what we might do is we'll get right into it, and I'll, if we can just go to the next slide, Beck. So one of the things that we are passionate about is obviously research, development, and extension. We're looking at opportunities of how we engage with new and emerging industries to achieve that, and certainly a core focus of achieving that is the formation of a sound research, development, and extension plan for the industry that you're trying to tackle. And just to see on the screen, we've got a quick snapshot of a publication that we'll shortly be releasing, which looks at the Australian insect industry. So we've actually gone and put a research and development and extension plan forward for that. Brian will go through in a moment quite some detail about how we've segmented our industries, But essentially, one of the things that we're looking for from applicants is that an RD&E plan is put in place for the sector that they're engaging with. And I think if you look at what we've typically received, and Brian will go into this in a bit more depth, is we want to make sure that we're covering all aspects of the industry and any value-added opportunities that exist. So whether that be production-based, market demand, or industry development. We also expect that those plans, when they're received, are prioritised so that we have a good understanding of what that industry really needs to grow and achieve that $10 million target that we spoke about. The other thing too is we expect that when that RD&E plan is put together, that it's industry owned and endorsed. We're certainly looking at helping industries achieve that, and if there isn't an RD&E plan in place, we would be looking to invest in the formation of one before we went into individual projects. But I'll leave the detail behind some of that to my colleague and chair of our Emerging Industries Advisory Panel, Brian Ruddle, who will now give an overview of some of the investment opportunities that we have and some of the specifics. So I'll pass over to you, Brian.
That's great. Thanks very much, Tom, and welcome everyone. So I suppose the focus that we've got, and just sort of reiterating what Tom was saying, is that it's a big focus on industries rather than focusing on an individual company or something like that. And so what we're really wanting to do is to help grow industries, and that's why we're talking about RD&E plans. So the big thing there, I suppose, is sort of looking at GVP. So GVP stands for gross value of production. We won't have anything for this particular round, but in future rounds, we will have some more information on GVP. But for this particular round, we do require industries to, I suppose, if you like, categorize themselves into different GVP categories, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We've sort of got under 2 million, I've got between 2 and 10 million, and then over 10 million. And so it's going to be really important because it sort of influences, if you like, the availability of funding and I suppose sort of what we require in terms of match funding as well. The big focus is to try to help industries grow, and that's why we're talking about a gross value of production. So what we're looking at is investing in projects that help industries move from, say, 1.5 million to 5 million to 8 million to 10 and beyond. And the longer term aim is to help progress industries into becoming levy-paying industries. So within agri-futures, there's a number of levy-paying industries, including honeybees, we've got thoroughbreds, we've got rice, we've got deer, and they were all emerging industries at one particular point in time, but they started to grow to a point where we had industry associations, we had networks, and industries were actually starting to tackle common problems. Now, I suppose, again, that is the key focus for this call and for the Emerging Industries program, is to really sort of focus on how we can support particular projects that will unblock key challenges for the industry. So Beck, just get you going to the next slide, thanks. So this slide shows the three phases that I just spoke about a moment ago. So phase one, we're calling it prospecting, but this is for industries that have got a gross value of production of under $2 million per annum. Phase two is sort of between 2 and 10 million per annum, and then phase three is greater than 10 million. The reason that we've gone through this phased approach is because, number one, we've got limited funds that are available in the Emerging Industries program, but also it's recognizing that, smaller industries are sort of, generally have less members and they're in growing phases. And so there's different types of projects that we want to be funding. You know, while we'd love to be providing huge amounts of money to early stage industries, we really need to be focusing you know, on those that are really going to be sort of driving towards that $10 million and beyond, because again, our remit is to really try to get the next generation of levy paying industries up and running. For each of those different phases, we've got different maximum funding amounts per project. So for phase 1, it's 50,000. Phase 2, it's up to 400,000. And phase 3, it's 500,000. We've got very strict timeframes around that as well. So phase 1, it's 50,000 over 1 year. Phase 2, it's 400,000 up to 2 years, and 500,000 up to 2 years for phase 3. For this year, sorry, now I'll talk about funding. So funding contributions, again, sort of, you know, link in with all of that. So for phase 1, we really like to see co-contributions. So when we're doing the assessments, it is desirable. For phase 2, it's mandatory. We require a co-contribution of 25%, and that's a cash co-contribution. And for phase 3, we require 50%. And then we like to see, or it's mandatory, commercial partnerships for each of those phases. Something I'd really like to stress is that in previous rounds, we've had people trying to push the envelope in terms of the dollar amounts, in terms of co-contributions, in terms of the number of years. And we'll talk more about this a bit later on in the presentation, but for this round, these are set figures. So if you're a phase 1 industry and you come through and you're sort of saying that you want to do a $200,000 project, sorry, it won't be assessed. So it's really important that everyone starts focusing in on those mandatory requirements, because if they're not being met, they won't actually go, you know, your applications won't go through for assessment. So looking at, I suppose, some more information around the types of projects that we're focusing on. In that first row there, it's really about, you know, the development of RD&E, or strategic industry plans. So as Tom mentioned, we require these plans to be in place before we can invest. A large number of industries do have these plans. If you're from an industry that doesn't have an RD&E plan, what we would like is for your application to focus on developing an RD&E plan. Now, that can use external consultants, it could be using industry members themselves, but it's really important that we have RD&E plans from an assessment perspective, because again, what we want are projects that are going to help the industry grow, and the RD&E plans give us some confidence that the projects that we're funding are wanted by industry, rather than being pet projects, if you like, for individual companies. So we'll be looking at production-focused R&D priorities within those plans, market demand focused. And so what we mean by market demand, it could be around supporting, if you like, the you know, the development of new products. There could be supply chain challenges and things like that that could be looked at. Industry development activities as well. So that's whether that's industry development forums, it could be networking events, it could be industry conferences. And we're looking at how, you know, and again, it depends on the industry and what your key requirements are. But you know, it could be around some of that industry governance aspects, and that's something that we're very happy to look at. We've included in subject matter expert travel support. We've left that as a separate thing there, just to be, so everyone's aware of it, that we will fund those sorts of activities. And then, yeah, the governance strengthening piece. So the second row there just gives you a bit more information about what we mean about supporting production, supporting market demand, and supporting industry. And this information is available, I believe, Tom, on the website, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct. Open call.
Yep, that's great. And then the third row there, and this comes back to, I suppose, challenges that we were facing in previous rounds. because what we were finding is we were getting applications from consultants and other groups that had best intentions for industries, but the applications weren't being supported by industry groups. And so coming back to our focus again with emerging industries is to grow industries. And so we need support from industry associations, and we need confidence that industry associations are backing the research that's being requested in the proposals. So for supporting production, we need industry association. If you do have an industry association, we need them to be the applicant. We need them to be driving things. Where there's no industry association, well then, and we're dealing with some industries that only have 3 or 4 members, we either need 30% of those members or 10, whichever is the lower number. So if there's only, you know, so say there's 9 members, you know, we need 3 or 4, we need basically 4 of them to be supporting that particular research project. And what we mean by support is letters of support. And we'll talk about it a bit later on, but it's really going to be important that the letters of support are individual. They're not replicated. So please don't send around a standard template, because what we need in the letters of support is information about how those individual producers are going to be involved in the project, particularly using the outcomes from the project. Supporting market demand is the same. We need industry associations involved, but again, if there's no industry associations, well then at least we need 2 producers and 1 processor supporting the application through those letters of support. And then for industry growth and sustainability type projects, we need the industry associations, and that has to be there. But or it could be another. If you don't have a formal association, as long as there's a grouping that can demonstrate that they've got the backing of the majority of producers, well then we can look at those applications. The reason we've got this, and look, some people might think this is a pretty sort of hard and fast, if you like, around this industry association piece, but there's a lot of other grant programs around for individual technology support and things like that. Coming back to, again, the focus that we've got for emerging industries is to build industries. And so that's why we need this focus on either a critical mass of producers involved and wanting a particular research project, or an industry association backing it. And so that's sort of where it's really important. Down the bottom there, we really encourage collaboration. So this is about bringing in supply chain partners, other research organisations, government agencies, other investors. When we're assessing these applications, we like to see how the different groups are participating to help grow the industry, because it gives us confidence that there's again a critical mass of interest to try to drive an industry forward. Beck, if you just flick on to the next slide, thanks.
So what we're going to do now actually is we're going to come back to this. We actually have put a little interval in between, because we want you to think of your questions as you're going along based on what Brian's just told you. Certainly there's plenty of food for thought. One thing, just before I introduce Nicole, who's going to go through our next session, if you've got any questions, please send them through to programs@agrifutures.com.au. And also, if you could do us a favour and perhaps on the chat within the GoToMeeting, just give us a bit of background of where you're from and what industries you might be representing, because I think it's really valuable information for us in emerging industries just to get a feel of the industries that are showing interest in our open call. So with that in mind, we're actually going to jump now to Clarity, which is the system that we use for applications. We're going to come back to some of the points that Brian raised after this presentation, but I'm going to pass over to my colleague Nicole, and she's our Manager Corporate, just to give you a bit of a feel of how our Clarity systems works. We've found it in the past, particularly with industry associations. This is a new product for a lot of you when you're thinking about putting applications into us, and Nicole's just going to give us an overview of the system and take on board a lot of the questions that we received individually from a lot of applicants in previous rounds. So I'll just pass over to Nicole. Keep the questions coming in as you're listening, and we will continue on at the end of this presentation with some more about the application process and what we need. So over to you, Nicole.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to just touch on a couple of different things in relation to Clarity. So the first thing is how to gain access to our system. Then it's the process to follow within the system, which is not always intuitive if you're not familiar with it, and then how to get help. So Beck, if you could jump on to the next one, thank you. I just thought I'd give you a quick overview of why we need a tool like Clarity. So as a statutory authority, it's really important that we are able to document how we've made our decisions for funding of projects. And Clarity is a large part of our record keeping system. So it's really important that the information inside this system is accurate. We understand that it's not the most intuitive system to use, and we are in the process of replacing it. But in the meantime, there are a number of resources that can help you use the system for your applications. Beck, do you want to jump onto the next one for me? So there's a number of different ways to gain access to Clarity depending on whether you're set up in our system or not. All of these are available on our website, and I've just put the link on the bottom of the slide for you. So if you've never used Clarity before and you don't know if your company is already set up, there's a new user and company creation request form. And when you complete that, if you just indicate at the bottom which application you're submitting for, so in this case, the Emerging Industries Program, we'll reply with your user details and also send you a user guide to help you use the system for the first time. If you think your company is already set up and you just need access for yourself, there's just a new user request form, which is a bit simpler than the other one, and the same will apply. We'll set up your user details and then send you your login and some instructions on how to use the system. If you're not sure if your company exists in the system, just go ahead and fill out the first one. It's a little bit longer, but it'll save a bit of time if you're not in the system. We'll note that it does have bank account details on there, which is just designed to streamline things in the event that your project's successful and goes on to contracting. However, if you are uncomfortable filling that out at this point in time, that's perfectly reasonable. Just put not applicable in those fields and we'll get that information off you down the track. So once you've been set up, we send an email to you with your login details with a temporary password. The first time you log in, you'll need to reset that. And if you are an existing user in Clarity and you've forgotten your password, you won't be able to reset it. You'll have to send an email through to our help desk and we'll reset it for you. It's very heavily encrypted in the back end, so none of us can see the passwords. Everyone accesses Clarity the same way, so it's a cloud-based system via the web address on the screen, and access is set by the type of user you are. So when we create your account, that allocates you to your company, and it also links to any projects you've submitted. At any time, if you need help, email our help desk and one of us will get back to you with some assistance. The process for applications is just on the screen. So you start by obviously obtaining access to the system, and then you navigate to the applications area where you'll start your application. I will just note that occasionally there is an error in Internet Explorer that won't allow you to enter text in a field. If you are experiencing that, we recommend that you use one of the other browsers, Chrome, Firefox, or Microsoft Edge. Once you've completed your application, it needs to be submitted for approval by the administrative contact that's been set up for your organisation. So each organisation can have a number of different researchers but only one admin contact. If you're a smaller company or an industry body, a consultant, you might be the principal investigator and the admin contact, which means you'll have to approve your own application. It seems like a crazy step, but it's partly a fraud control measure to make sure that people aren't submitting applications on behalf of an organisation that's not aware of it. And it gives some validation that it's a legitimate research. And it's also just to make sure that the organisation's aware of any research that's being submitted on its behalf. So while it is a little frustrating, if you are submitting for yourself, you still have to follow that approval process and approve your own application. Once that step's undertaken, the application is submitted to AgriFutures, and then we convert the project for assessment by the panel. So it's a simple process to submit the application and to do the admin approval, but it's just very important that you allow enough time for that to happen. So as I've mentioned, if you have an account but you haven't used it for a while, you may need the password reset, but it may also have been deactivated. So if there's not any activity on the account for a period of 12 months, it's automatically deactivated. If you try to log in and you get an error message that says your account's no longer active, you'll need to email help desk and ask for it to be reactivated. I've covered off the error message for text boxes. It does happen in 2 or 3 places in the application. So if possible, it's better to try to start completing your application in Chrome, Firefox or Edge. You can enter an application on behalf of the principal investigator. So if you're on the team of researchers, but you're not the lead researcher, but they will need to have an account too. So it's better if you get them set up at the same time, because you'll have to list them on the application. And another issue you may encounter is once you've completed your application, you might like to make a PDF of it so you've got a record. If it generates as a blank document, it's because there's a field in the application that hasn't been completed. So it's worth just going back over and double checking everything has been filled out. So we have put some indicative dates on the open call documentation, just to let you know that you should try to obtain access to Clarity by no later than the 6th of July, and that you submit it for administrative approval a few days before the open call closes, just so you're not running late and rushing towards the end. In our experience, if you leave it to the last minute, something will inevitably go wrong, and it can cause delays and just unnecessary stress. So that's the process. As I've mentioned, there's a number of resources available on the website at the path that I mentioned in the presentation. There are step-by-step user guides, and you can also email help desk at any time if you require any assistance. I'm not sure if you want to handle any questions now, Tom, or if you want to send them and
yeah, I think
I can respond to them a bit.
I might actually just open it up. So if anyone does have any questions specifically around Clarity, we might actually ask that while we have Nicole on the line. Just before people do that, I actually just want to just reiterate an issue that we've found in previous rounds, and I think Nicole sort of said, look, please register by the 6th of July. It's really important because a few people have been caught out in the past. Our deadlines are fairly firm to the point where we've had a couple of applicants that have actually been unable to submit their application because, one, they didn't put all the materials in the system by the due date, and secondly, it does take time obviously to get the approvals from within your own organisation. That admin area that Nicole mentioned before is critical. The submission isn't actually complete to AgriFutures until the administration has also ticked off on the application. And what we've found in the past is applicants have submitted on the knowledge thinking that they'd finalised the project, only to find that the administrator hadn't ticked through, and so subsequently the submission wasn't completed. So very important that you that you ensure that the admin contact, even if it is yourself, goes through the process so that it is submitted. Yeah, but I guess I'll open it up just for a couple of minutes, whether there are any questions from people on the line. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask. Just checking, Beck, that people are unable to unmute.
Yeah, they should be able to unmute themselves, Tom.
Okay. So just while people are thinking of questions, just one that we commonly hear from applicants, and we'll touch on some of the requirements shortly. The expectation is that when you submit your application in Clarity, that all the attachments, which we'll go through in a minute, are also included in that application process. So please, when you're submitting your application, submit all the materials at the same time. So please pay careful attention to the requirements on the website of exactly what should be attached. I think Brian mentioned letters of support being one example. So we will go through that. We have instances in the past where applications haven't provided the attachments and as a result haven't necessarily been considered. So I'll just give it another few seconds. And are there any questions from anyone? All right, well, I think you've answered everything that people need to ask, Nicole, and just want to say thank you for providing that to the people on board today. We might continue on then, and please, if questions emerge throughout, I believe there's a few that have been coming through the chat as we've been talking. I don't see anything here specifically in relation to Clarity, so we might just keep moving on. Thanks, Nicole, and yeah, we'll answer those other questions when we move to the Q&A session. All right, so moving back, you obviously now have an overview of the system that we use, and it's really important that you actually understand how that operates, because a lot of people put a lot of work in applications only to find that the major stumbling block has been the actual the completion of the application. What we will now touch on is some of the key requirements and changes from the last round. So the first one is really for the people that may be on board that have been in previous sessions. We've removed what we called a business model canvas, which was an attachment that we required applicants to submit in the past and gave an overview of the industry. We found that often the approaches that were made by applicants were quite variable, and so we have removed that document as well as the additional selection criteria document that was an attachment. So now when you put your submissions in, we expect that all your responses are managed purely and solely in Clarity. I think the other big change that has occurred is a greater focus on budget and funding duration. I think Brian alluded to the fact a moment ago that there was attempts made to really test the budget availability at each phase, and so we've been really clear in the table there to mention that they are the caps on those phases. One thing that we will point out is they are on a per project basis, and that's really important because people have asked us whether or not that budget applies to an industry or whether it applies to a project. The budgets are on a per project basis. So for argument's sake, if a particular emerging industry were to put in 2 applications, they would obviously be eligible for that budget amount on each project. But that being said, part of the reason why we're having an RD&E plan is we need to really understand from you as applicants how those projects, if you decide to put in multiple projects, fit in the RD&E plan and its prioritisation. So as Brian alluded to, if you don't have an RD&E plan in place in the first instance, you need to focus your attention on the development of one in the first instance for your emerging industry. Similarly, when we talk about budgets, the durations are really clear. So at each stage, you will see those budget amounts, and we treat that on a time but also duration phase. So they do go for different time periods according to the phase that you're at, but the dollar value can be split unequally up to the maximum cap of the time duration. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an equal amount in each financial year, but the cap does apply. So if you're going to put the money across multiple years, if you're eligible, bear in mind that the cap is that limit.
Tom, sorry, can I just make just an additional comment on the RD&E plans? The reason that we're putting an emphasis on these RD&E plans is not just for AgriFutures. Yes, it helps us when we're assessing proposals, but the other reason we're focusing on them is because it provides industries with a document that they can go out to state governments with. They can have other discussions with universities and other research organisations. So it's actually a document to help industry engage with other funding providers as well to help grow the industry. And so, yes, it helps AgriFutures, but the reason we're focusing on it is that they will really help the industries themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So it certainly, and we don't see these as static documents either. We certainly would like to think that these RD&E plans, while they're comprehensive across the range of use cases, that they'd be a valuable document for the industries themselves over time. And as the industry continues to grow, that they would evolve. But certainly from our perspective, we want that RD&E plan in place so that we can really get a good understanding of what are the biggest priorities for your particular emerging industry with a growth mindset. How can we accelerate that growth to really accelerate the development of that industry through RD&E? So it's really important to be comprehensive, but also to have priorities. So that probably covers that third point on the screen in terms of it is mandatory to have an RD&E plan prior to the submissions. Certainly one of the things in here is obviously a stronger emphasis on industry partnerships and greater national focus. Brian said, certainly we want industries to work with associations or groups of people or organisations that will assist the growth of that sector. And yes, we are preferring nationally orientated work. Certainly a lot of our emerging industries aren't constrained to one geographical area. And so particularly where they are in multiple areas, we would expect that you would work across the different zones of the country to make sure that that you're getting that national focus. Moving on to the next slide, Beck. So there's a couple of documents, and the links to these are on the AgriFutures Open Call webpage. Is two pieces of market research that were conducted by AgriFutures in 2017 and 2018, looking at different commodity sectors and looking at what are some of the growth opportunities for those sectors. We are just looking in the process of getting these updated, but similarly, they are still a valuable tool, even if some of the data may need updating, to help you as an applicant or potential applicant to consider what are some of the challenges and opportunities that your industry faces. Certainly, it's also to give a feel of how some of the industries are seen through the market analysis, and also to look at it both domestically and internationally about new and emerging opportunities for those industries. So we really want you to think about your application and what is the end product or end market that is going to be achieved through the growth of your sector. Is it going to be something that caters for a domestic market, an international market, or both for that matter? We really want you to outline where you see the growth of that sector and how the R&D that you're proposing in your applications is going to aid and assist the growth of that sector. So we might just move on. Thanks, Beck. So what is not eligible? So basically, as a result of some of the issues that we've already foreshadowed in the tables, and Brian and I will both add to this as we go along, we're not going to be accepting proposals this time around that doesn't have an industry-supported RDE strategy or plan. As we've said a couple of times in this webinar, where it's not available, you should focus on preparing one, because we certainly, we don't want to exclude you, but we want to have that clarity that the industry has thought about the RD&E requirements for their particular sector and how that might assist the growth of that sector. Obviously, we've mentioned as well, if you exceed the guideline funding and project time limits, we won't be assessing it. So we want you to really carefully consider the guidelines and make sure that any proposals you put through to us are fit for purpose for the funding and timeline limits that we've set. The minimum co-contribution requirements is also essential. So obviously, other than phase 1 where it is desirable, certainly in phase 2 and phase 3, we would expect a minimum cash contribution from different players in the value chain for your particular sector. So the other thing that we're looking for is a commercial focus. So obviously, we want to fund good science. That's like any R&D organisation. We want to ensure that we're really focusing on the science, but we need to actually see the pathway forward and how that particular work is going to really be implemented by the sector and by people that are commercially driving that marketplace. So how do you actually engage with the people that are either putting cash or capacity into the market and delivering commercial outcomes, so that the research that you conduct definitely has that impact in the industry. Next one, Beck. So obviously the other one that we're looking for is a detailed description of your proposed methodology to achieve the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Assume that we don't know anything about your industry. Now, there's a good chance that we do, because we've got a lot of skills across our panel and through the work that we've done in the past. But when you're putting in your proposal, really don't focus on just purely your capability. We want to know how you're actually going to deal with the issue that you're trying to tackle in your application, and really try and be as specific as you can about how you're going to achieve it, who you're going to involve, and what you're actually going to do. One thing that we also have observed in previous rounds is quite often, even though you are emerging industries, there has been a lot of work done in the past, either scoping studies or assessments or prioritization of particular efforts. And what we ask that you do is that you clearly demonstrate in your application that you've actually considered that. So for example, what other research has been done? How is the application that you're submitting to us building upon that? Or taking it in another direction because of other trends or activities. What we don't want you to do is actually not consider that, because it is actually quite difficult for us to assess whether or not we're starting from scratch or whether you're actually building upon the previous work. We say here are a sales pitch rather than a comprehensive project plan. So the fact that you're applying to us, we encourage. What we don't want to hear is just, my name's Joe Bloggs and I got a deal for you. We're going to develop this product and we're going to make a lot of money. We do get that in applications. What we want to know is, hi, I'm Joe Blogs. We've actually got a really detailed project plan that we're going to address the industry constraint or opportunity. So please make sure you focus on that when you're thinking about what you're trying to deliver. Importantly, you definitely need to identify the industry benefit. I think you've probably heard throughout many of the slides, we really want to see how your sector that you're doing this work for will benefit from it. And you know, basically we do get applications from companies in the past, and it wasn't clear how the transition of what they were doing is actually going to go back and solve the broader issues of the industry. Our goal is to get industry growth. So while we want to support companies, it has to support industry. So I can't stress that enough. Do not demonstrate who the project outcomes will be delivered to within the emerging industry. So don't just assume that you're going to do the work and it's going to sit on a bookshelf. Yes, you'll produce a report, but importantly for us, we want to know how you're going to get it to the value chain of the emerging industry that you're trying to tackle. So, you know, as we said, articulate your methodology, but importantly, as part of that methodology, articulate who will receive that information and how and what will it mean to them.
So, Tom, just to add another point into that one, what we really like to see is where end users are actually going to be involved in the research projects.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's not just a case of doing research and then miraculously end users get to use those outcomes, and it's sort of a normal, you know, extension type approach. We actually like to see involvement during the process, because if there's involvement during the process, there's a bigger, you know, chance or opportunity, if you like, for adoption to occur.
Yep. And then probably the last one, yeah, exactly, Brian. The last one here is making sure that project teams that do have senior people in their organisation, we really actually want to know who are the doers of the work as well. We don't just want to be impressed by the fact that you have some very experienced people and they have a low time commitment, as an example. We actually want to make sure that the people that are doing the work have the capability to be actively involved in the project activities. And so we ask that you put a lot of thought into the personnel before you submit, so that we've got a really clear understanding. Often we get a to be confirmed in our proposals, which actually makes it quite difficult for us to assess whether or not we have the confidence that that will be delivered effectively. So, and quite often that's supplemented by putting someone with, you know, a lot of experience, but not necessarily a lot of time. So please, yeah, just really think about those areas when you're putting in your submissions. As I said, if they're not considered, you make it very easy for us to say no to the project. So, and we obviously want to support a lot of projects, but if we can't have this basic information, it makes it very difficult. So moving on, Beck. Importantly, what you need to submit. I mentioned earlier, people have been caught out in the past where they haven't put in a submission. I think you heard from Nicole earlier about the Clarity system. Please, I would even suggest to you, if you haven't registered and you're thinking about applying, do it in the next day or two. Don't leave it till the end date, because the good thing about the submission is you can actually work on the submission in Clarity and save it as you're going along. You don't have to do it all on the day before. And yeah, I think from that point of view, a lot of people do leave it to the last minute, and it puts a lot of strain on them, and obviously we are our resources too, because we do get a lot of questioning. So please complete your application in the Clarity system. I would encourage you to register as early as possible. And I will say, make sure that all your attachments that we ask here, that you put them into the Clarity system, not send them to us separately via email. If you're having trouble in attaching it, as you saw in that presentation, there's a help desk email that you can use to ask questions. And I encourage you to use it if you're having any problems in Clarity. Use those channels. So as we mentioned, industry letters of support, it's critical that we receive these so that we have the confidence to know that the key players in your sector are actually supporting what you're applying to us to do. In previous rounds, as Brian alluded to, we had applicants where it was pretty clear that they wrote a script, sent it out to a whole heap of people, and then basically just changed the contact details on the letters of support. I will state that we do actually do checks on these letters of support often, just to check that they're legitimate, particularly when they do look like a copy and paste in job. So, you know, it's important that in those industry letters that they provide contact details to us, and that where possible, they express exactly how that industry association or group of people will support the application that you're putting in. What roles and functions do they have, and you know, where will they play their part in terms of delivering the outcomes within the project, but also making sure that the industry receives that information. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important that you demonstrate evidence that your proposal is building on existing research. So please, in your application, describe the existing research that you've looked at when you put the submission in. I mean, quite often in AgriFutures, we actually have done quite a lot of studies in a lot of the sectors that we're talking about today. So even as the first point of call, have a look at all the Rudic/AgriFutures research that's happened for the industry sector that you're looking at. But obviously, welcome to any other research that's out there that you're building upon. Any other strategies or documents that you think have high relevance to the research that you're proposing through us. One thing.
Sorry, Tom. Just adding to that one. Another thing for applicants to remember is international research. So a lot of us on the panel have done a lot of work overseas in a range of different industries. And so don't forget that, yes, there may not be much work done for your particular industry in Australia, but we need to have some confidence that it's not a simple case of looking overseas to find similar sort of outcomes that would help the industry grow. So it's important that applicants take into account some, you know, what's happening overseas as well.
Yeah, good point. And you know, and the other thing too is when we say research, don't also forget about some of the work that might be occurring in the commercial space too. So it's obviously important that we look at research in its raw format, but there might also be work that has been conducted by commercial players that may have relevance to your proposal. So, as I said, describe them in clarity so that it's really clear in terms of your methodology and how you're building upon that. And lastly, one thing that did catch people out a bit in the past was budgets. So when you're putting your budget into Clarity, if there is a cash contribution, please don't rely on that information being purely in the letters of support. We had a few applicants in the past whereby they actually got co-contribution in cash and they put it in the letter of support, but not necessarily in the budgeting Clarity. So while we identified those budgets, it was actually quite time consuming to try and account for all the different value chain players. And so there was a mismatch in budget amounts from time to time. So we asked that you put all your budget amounts, all your contributions into Clarity and describe them as within that system. Finally, just please note all attachments need to be submitted prior to the closing date. We had a couple of proposals whereby they put their primary submission in but didn't attach letters of support, and it made it pretty easy to say no because it is a critical aspect of this project. We want industry to be involved. So please make sure that you don't leave that part of your submission to the very close to the closing date, it did put a lot of stress on applicants in the past because we reiterated that it was mandatory and they hadn't necessarily gone out and checked with people. So this is where everyone has an opportunity to ask questions, and we have received a few. So I'm just going to go through these at the moment. And what we might do is go through the ones that you've received and then open it up for verbal questions. So just bearing in mind, and Brian, help me out on some of these if you want to add anything to it. So the first one was, through what procedure will an industry association be recognised by AgriFutures as the formal representative entity of the industry or the industry? So as we pointed out in that table, we mentioned that we've got different categories where it has to represent at least 50% of the industry for the production-based proposals. And Beck, actually, I might just get you to go back to that slide, the blue slide, which had the breakdown. I think it's slide 7. Just bear with us. We're just going back to this. Yep, so this one here, you can see on that bottom line, depending on the category which you're trying to support, the industry has to represent at least 50% of the industry, or if there's no industry association, at least 30% of producers or 10 producers, whichever is the lower number. As I said earlier, we prefer that if there are clusters of industry associations, that we prefer that you work with the national body if they exist, to ensure that we get a nationally orientated approach.
So the other thing to add there is that word full support. So while we'd really like the industry associations to put the applications in, the applicant can be someone else, but we need that full support. We need to have the confidence that the industry association is behind the application. And so that would be through a very detailed letter of support explaining the role of the industry association, coming back to the earlier point, the link back to the RD&E plan of that industry, and sort of, things along those lines.
Yeah. So, and by all means, if you want to raise, we can discuss this in Q&A as well. But I'll go through the others just before we open it up. Just to confirm, is this round just for stage 2 industries, i.e. $2 to $10 million? The answer is no. It's for all 3 phases, early phases right through to the more advanced. But one thing I will point out, if you just go back one more slide, Beck. So there are caps on each of the phases. So all 3 phases here can submit, but we are strict on how we cap the budget and time duration on each. And we expect, obviously, given that the scale of the proposal is expanding, but we expect high quality proposals against all 3 categories, but particularly now that we're looking at much larger volumes of money in the phase 3, we certainly are looking at, we expect that they are high quality proposals. The one thing I will state is it's really important that you actually look at the category that your industry fits within, because, as Brian alluded to earlier, we did have instances where people tried to mould their industry gross value of production to fit the budgetary amount. So please try and give us a clear understanding of how you calculated your gross value of production when you put your submission in. Just coming back, other questions. Does developing industry RD&E plans accounted as category 3 industry projects or not necessary? So the concept of an RD&E plan is not specific to any particular phase. Now, if you're a phase 3 and don't have an RD&E plan, you're in exactly the same boat as a phase 1 project. We expect that you need to put an RD&E plan together so that we can understand the range and scope of RD&E industry issues for your emerging industry. When looking for industry support, does percentage of producers refer to producer number or GBP should be weighed? I think that's weighted. So, Beck, can you just go back to the next slide? So, GBP and producer numbers are two separate things. So, I guess the GBP amount is for us to enable an understanding of what phase you belong to. The producer numbers is basically just for us to have the confidence that when you're putting a submission in, that you have the industry support regardless of what GBP that industry's at. So even if you're in a smaller industry where there's a low volume of producers, you need to demonstrate that you've got that low number of producers involved in the project that you're trying to support. And equally so, the larger industries. Excuse me. So yeah, they're actually two separate things. So don't treat them as together in that respect. Our expectation is that you clearly state the gross value of production, but also demonstrate how, excuse me, how you're engaging the industry producers.
Yeah, so just adding to that one, Tom, and just again for clarity, the reasoning for that is that when we're assessing applications, we need confidence that the project that we're being asked to fund is a priority for the industry and is going to support the industry's growth. And that's why we've sort of said, okay, we need more, for production type industries, we need more producers. When we're supporting market demand, it's more making sure we've got a mix of producers, processors / supply chain partners there, so that we've got some confidence that there's actually interest in actually progressing commercialization afterwards. What we were finding is we were getting a lot of applicants coming through. We could see the research, we couldn't see the commercial application piece, and that's where we wanted to make sure that we had sufficient either producers and or sort of producers processors involved in those different types of projects.
Yep. So the next question is, does industry RD&E plan needs to be supported by AgriFutures funding to be acknowledged by AgriFutures? The short answer is no, but what is important is that you can clearly demonstrate to us that RD&E plan is supported by the industry. I can't stress enough the fact that we want an RD&E plan, but we certainly want to have industry support from that emerging sector to give us the confidence that it has been considered widely amongst the industry, and that when it's prioritised, that we have a good grasp that those priorities are actually not the views of a single person or entity. It's widely recognised that that's a barrier to growth or an opportunity that hasn't been met. So yeah, so does it need to be funded by us to acknowledge it? The answer is no. I mean, as we point out, we will provide support to industries to help them develop the RD&E plan, but certainly if one has been developed outside of that process, we just need you to demonstrate that the industry is behind it and clearly demonstrate how that is supported by the industry. So we've got another question here. Within the 53 stage 2 industries that have been identified by AgriFutures, there were 26 that reached stage 2 in the report that you suggested we read. Are these the priority industries or ones like garlic that were just stage 1? Are they ruled out or just unlikely to get supported? So that report obviously was to give us some guidance because of the volume of industries, to give us an understanding of which ones have the highest growth potential. we certainly haven't ruled out lower category industries. It would be safe to assume that a lot of those higher prospect industries have approached us, and certainly from our perspective, we want to see a demonstrated way in which they will reach the 10 million GBP. So if there's an industry in that report where it is a stage one and it's not clear how that 10 million will be reached, we actually expect you to demonstrate or prove how it will reach that 10 million GBP. So we're not immune from supporting some of those lower sector industries, but we need evidence. We need you as applicants to really convince us that there is a pathway forward to reaching that 10 million GBP. If like any market research report, market research is based on a whole range of things, whether it be consultation or doing surveys or phone conversations to try and understand the market and how it's performing, and also existing research. So, certainly we have taken a mindset that we have a clearer understanding of the higher growth industries. If you as applicants can prove to us that, I think you picked out garlic in this question. If you can show that garlic has actually got that potential, then by all means justify it in your application to us and be really clear about how you're going to achieve that growth target.
Yeah, and Tom, just building on your comment there, the thing that we're really interested in looking at is the whole thing from a return on investment perspective. So what we're wanting to see is that if we're being asked to fund a particular project, how is that going to help that industry grow? Is there going to be the value in that research project? Because the reason we've got the 3 phases is to help industries move from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. And so when we're doing the assessments, the key thing for us is that we can see how those industries can progress through those phases. If it's just a research project to sort of hit the status quo, it's going to be a bit harder. But in saying that, if there's sort of key biosecurity risks or other concerns that could be impacting trying to maintain an industry to a particular point, we can also look at those things. But coming back to the main premise, it's about how do industries grow through those phases.
Yeah. So that's all the questions we've received so far on the chat forum. What we might do is just have a few minutes if people have additional questions that they would like to verbally raise with us, by all means put them through to us, and then if there's not, we'll just give some final information about the next steps and draw to a close. But yeah, certainly if there's particular questions from people that they would like to raise in relation to any aspect of this, please feel free to do so now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Stephen, Central Queensland University. And just I have 2 questions. One is that the development of RD&E plan for an industry accounted as the industry growth and sustainability, or accounting to the marketing demand and the production?
Yep, so I might take this one, Tom. So look, what we want to see in the RD&E plans is a combination. So we sort of see, so we see that, particularly with a lot of earlier stage industries, doing work on the market demand side as well as the production side are probably key elements to help progress an industry. So just focusing on production alone possibly won't actually help to drive things forward.
So in this case, for the industry support, when they do not have an association, how do you accounting to the number of producers or the percentage of producers to get in supporting this such proposal?
Yep, so that's where we need the evidence from the applicant as to how they've calculated that. So the reason we've done this is because we need confidence that, as Tom was saying earlier, that industry is supporting the need for this particular research. And so, what we need is some indications of, well, there's 8 producers across the country and 4 of them are supporting this, and here's the letters of support. That, from an assessment panel, gives us some confidence that this piece of research is important. And so, so we just need evidence from the applicant.
And just to add to what Brian said in this particular instance, we have had a project just recently from an emerging industry sector in the animal space, which is looking at dairy opportunities. And so what we found is that the work was clearly demonstrated as a major bottleneck to progression of the industry. And when we actually went out and communicated to that particular sector as a result of the work, a lot of the farmers that were either producing that animal for dairy production and or thinking about diversifying into it basically recognised that because that RD&E need had actually overcome the constraint, it's actually a massive game changer in terms of the farmer or producer actually moving into that enterprise. So as you can imagine, a lot of emerging industries have bottlenecks. It could be price, it could be access to markets, it could be a lack of infrastructure. It also could be the fact that there's not any knowledge or understanding. So there's certainly, I think part of the reason for the RD&E to have that industry confidence is so that we know exactly that the science or the commercial aspects that are being developed in your project going forward, they have clear pathways to the marketplace.
Yeah, and in case the distribution of producer is pretty uneven with their yield, how does this being accounted? For example, in an industry, you have probably 10 growers. 2 of them accounted to 80% of the total yield, while the other 8 probably only 20%. In this case, whether you only need the support of the 2 plus probably another 1 or 2 small growers, or you still need the 5 number, 50% of the total producers.
No, we didn't go down that path, mainly because what we're trying to focus on is expanding industry bases and trying to expand the overall production piece. So we didn't do a weighted thing for that reason. So really, it's focusing in on numbers.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we don't want an industry to be constrained to a small number of people. Don't get me wrong, we obviously want that industry to grow, but we also want the fruit of that industry to be and footprint of that industry to be wide reaching, so that we can, turn these into really viable major industry for Australian agriculture.
So can I just give an example? So we have had applications in the past from one major player in a particular industry. The challenge with that is that the project outcomes were going to benefit that one large player, not the rest of the players. And so the challenge for us from an assessment panel is that, well, how is this going to benefit the industry? So that's why we went in terms of it doesn't matter whether they're small producers or larger producers. It's actually about how do we sort of start to expand the industry rather than just support, 1 or maybe 2 that are going to get the most benefit out of it. So.
Yeah, and for the small producers, is there any threshold or definitions so they can be defined as a commercial one? For example, some small producers just grow a few hundred trees and take them onto the market, which looks a bit more casual in terms of production.
Yep.
Are these people also considered as the producers?
That's something that the applicants need to convince us of. So yes, we know that there's backyard producers, but some are commercial or semi-commercial. We just need the applicant to make that call and convince us that who they're dealing with is a commercial, semi-commercial, or of aspirations to be commercial, rather than, well, really they've only got 2 trees in the backyard and that's all they ever want, and that's all the capacity they've really got. So we haven't defined it. mainly because we found that because we're working across so many different emerging industries, to try to define it would start to block certain groups out. But we need to be convinced, I suppose, is the bottom line, or is the answer to that one.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
And just to add to what Brian said, you know, our goal is to grow industries. It's really how that happens is really up to the applicant to demonstrate to us. What we want to see is how the people that you're trying to influence in there can really show that industry growth. You know, certainly from the point of view of AgriFutures, we want that clear distinction. And the thing too, I think we should add to that is obviously don't just focus on who's growing the crop or the animal or the aquatic species right now. It's like, what could the footprint look like? We had a project just recently in one of our aquatic sectors, which was looking at taking it from a cottage industry, as they say, to a large scale production system. So where there could be potentially large volumes of producers required to meet the demand requirements of the product. So if you can demonstrate that, that also improves the confidence that we have that you've thought through the growth ambitions of that particular industry that you're trying to target.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
All right. Are there any other questions from anyone else on board? All right. Well, just double check with Beck to make sure we haven't received any more through the chat. I don't think we have. But I guess a couple of more administrative matters now. So if you do have any queries about the emerging industries open call process, what we ask is that you actually channel these via emails through to programs@agrifutures.com.au so that we can come back and address those issues. I'd also encourage you to have a look on the Emerging Industries Open Call website to ensure that you check all the details regularly to make sure that you're comfortable with the eligibility of your submission and any other questions you might have about the process that we're following. Finally, I guess we put this call out in early June to give you sufficient time to put in a thought out application. The open call will close on Monday the 13th of July at 12 noon Australian Eastern Standard Time. Please check your local time zone because we have had instances in the past where people were ringing literally minutes before the closing time asking for an extension. There are no extensions. It closes. If you don't meet that deadline, I'm sorry, but you will not be considered for assessment. So please do not leave it to the last minute. I reiterate that you register as soon as possible and start your proposal if you're thinking about doing it. And make sure that you actually do your checks with the industry to ensure that you've got their support before submitting, because all those attachments that we referred to earlier are required for assessment. So without any further ado, we might call it a day there. This webinar recording will be processed and we will endeavour to put this on the Open Call website within the next 24 to 48 hours. If you have registered for this webinar, please, we'll also send a quick email out to you just to let you know that it is on the Open Call website. If you know of someone that wasn't available today and hasn't heard about the Open Call that may have an interest, please, I'd encourage you to get them to watch this webinar recording on the website, and then if they have questions, to follow the programs@agrifutures.com.au page. I want to thank you all for your time today, and we look forward to seeing some really good, well thought out proposals, and hope to continue to work with you all to get some really sound investments up and running in our emerging industries program. So with that in mind, we will stop the recording now and wish you all a pleasant day.